YouTube? This is Dan the Fix-It Man. I had another quick video here for you. I'm going to show you how to change your front brake pads and your front brake rotors on a 2016 Kia Sorento. Now the first thing I like to do is push the caliper piston back inside the caliper, and there's several ways to do this. The easiest way that I've found to do that is just grab a regular screwdriver and just pry it in between the caliper body and the front of the edge of the pad and just pull that towards you slowly and steadily. What that's doing is prying the caliper piston back inside the caliper. You can see it move there. See, now we've got a lot more room inside there for the new pad material and the new rotors. Now there's other ways to do this. Usually you would take this caliper off and use this Caliper Compression tool or a C-clamp or something similar. That works fine as well, and sometimes this method doesn't push it in far enough, so you still end up having to use a C-clamp or channel locks or something to press that back in. But this method seems to be working just fine on this vehicle. It's always a good idea to take a look at your master cylinder and make sure that you've got enough room inside the reservoir for the additional fluid that's going to go backwards through your system. So a question I get a lot of times is, why didn't you bleed the brakes? And here's your bleeder valve on, and some people, before they push the caliper piston back in, they'll open this bleeder screw and push the old brake fluid out through there, and that's fine as well if you'd like to do it that way. The way I'm doing it, you don't have to bleed the brakes, and this vehicle is new enough, the fluid is clear enough to not have to worry about changing it. Also, a lot of people ask me if you need to take off the reservoir cap before doing this. You really don't, because it's vented, but let's go up there and take a look anyway so I can show you what it looks like. Now here's our brake fluid reservoir. You can see we're still well below the max line. I've already done the other side. That's why I knew that we had plenty of room inside here. Because we're well below that, I was able to push that caliper piston back in. You can crack this lid loose or take it off, but keep in mind that brake fluid does absorb moisture even in the air. I think it's a good idea just to leave that on and avoid letting new air or new moisture get into that brake fluid. It's hydroscopic, meaning it absorbs moisture. That's not good for it, but you can see that it's still fairly clear or translucent, and we don't need to worry about opening this system or bleeding the brakes on this car. Next thing we can do is loosen and remove these caliper slide pin bolts. They go into these slide pins right here. Sometimes the slide pin will spin as you're trying to remove it, so you can put a 17mm wrench on the slide pin and hold it steady while you loosen the 14mm bolt. I'm just going to throw this 14mm socket on here and see if I can't break these loose. This is just a Milwaukee. This is their fuel impact 3/8 drive extended. And we can take those out. Sometimes on these calipers, especially the lightweight ones, I'll just let them kind of sit off to the side or set them up here. I just grab this it's just a little hook on a rope. Just hang it up there on the spring out of the way. They make these nice little S-hook caliper hangers. I might have to pick up a pair. If I do, I'll put a link in the description. Alright, now we can pull out the old pads, and you see we've got these little V springs here that push the pads apart, just like they're doing right here. So we'll just grab those. They just go into these little holes in the end of the backing plate of each brake pad. We'll just set those aside. Some kits will come with replacement pieces and replacement hardware. This kit does not come with those, so we're going to reuse those. And we can pull out the old brake pads. And on this car, we are going to change the rotors as well. You can see we're really close to this little metal noisemaker, but not quite. All right, now we need to loosen and remove the two bolts that hold on this caliper bracket or caliper hanger. I'm going to move the camera around so you can see them. These are just a 17mm. And that's what those bolts look like. They've got a little lock washer, split lock washer on them. This top one here is a little trickier. You can just use a little wrench, but just for the sake of going faster, I'm using this guy here. And then it's a good idea to have one hand on here when you loosen this. Otherwise, this can drop on the ground. And we'll take that off. All right, now before we can pull off the rotor, you can see we've got these two Phillips head screws in here. This is I think it's a number 3 Phillips, but I'm using this little impact. You can just tap the back of this with a hammer, and not only does it seat it in there, but it breaks it loose. Now you can also just use a little impact wrench or impact driver as well. Sometimes will work, but I like to really pound these in, and then the shaft on this, because it's got a hex shape, I can just put a little crescent wrench on here or something and just give it a little bump, and that loosens it. These can be a real pain if you strip them, so I recommend you take a little bit of time or use an impact screwdriver on them. There's lots of different versions of impact drivers or impact screwdrivers, but find something that works for you. Give it a few taps and then usually just like to bump that, and that seems to crack it loose. And there's the other one. Now sometimes these rotors are stuck on the hub and you can give them a whack with a hammer or a sledge. This one just came right off, which is nice. Another thing, before you put the new rotor on, you might want to brush this surface and just make sure that you don't have a lot of rust or buildup there. Really don't have a lot of rust here where I live. We're in Southern California, and I think this car's been around here its whole life. Part number for the rotor I'm using is right here. This is the Power Stop Evolution, and this is coated. I don't know, it's got this little sticker on here. It says genuine geomet. I don't know what that means. It's the type of material that they use to coat it, but it sounds good to me. No, I think it's actually just nice that you don't have to wipe off any of the grease or anything. And then we'll just set that on, and then we'll get our little Phillips head screws started in here. I'm just going to give it a little turn. Just make sure you make it snug, but be careful not to strip those out even when you're tightening them. That feels good. There's a part number for the pads I'm using right here. Again, these are the Power Stop Evolution. These are Evolution Plus. And it comes with hardware. Now when they say hardware, they're just talking about these little pad retainer clips or shims that go on the caliper bracket. So we'll get those changed out. But it does not come with these little V springs, so you will need to reuse those. Now before we put this back on, we're going to swap out these clips right here. Just pop out the old ones. Before I put the new ones on, we'll clean that surface down there really well. Mostly just getting off any debris. We want these new pad retainer clips or shims, we want them to seat flush in there. Now, a lot of people, when they put the brake grease on, they'll put some underneath these shims or these clips, and I think that's fine. These just kind of snap in place. It's fairly simple to do. And I'm not saying you shouldn't put grease underneath here. I don't think it's a bad idea at all, but I usually don't. And again, we don't live in a rusty area here, so I know some of you that do are probably putting grease underneath there. But the idea of the grease is so that the pad can, this is where it moves. It moves in and out as the brakes are applied. Now before I put this on, I'm also going to pull out the slide pins, wipe off the old grease, and clean them up and put some new grease on there. Now this kit does come with some lube for the contact points. Got a little diagram here on this little bit of grease that comes with this kit. This is of course letting you know that you need to lubricate the back sides of the brake pads and the slide pins. And just use the back of my glove because that's nice and clean. Just kind of spread that grease around. That's that one. We'll do the same thing with this one here. Just get it all cleaned up. The slide pin is slightly different than the other one. It does not have the rubber boot at the end. Same thing, we'll just doesn't take much, just a little bit of that grease. And again, I'll use the back side of my glove just because it's cleaner than the front side right now. Having to conserve my gloves right now due to coronavirus. I'm going to take off the little sticker here too before I forget. A little bit of grease in each of these little channels right here. Again, that's just where the brake pad is going to ride. We just need it to be able to move without binding up. Now we can put this caliper support bracket back on with those same bolts. Then we're going to torque these to 72 foot-pounds. Alright, now we can put the new pads in. Now this one here with the little noisemaker or the little wear indicator is on the inside pad, and we are going to reuse this taller shim right here too. We're going to put this on the back of the pad, but I'm going to put a little bit of grease on there first. Just a thin layer is all it takes, and We're going to do the little ends here as well. And then we'll put our shim on here. Just line it up. It's got these little holes in the back where it'll just snap in place. Like so. And I just want to get a little bit of grease, really just around this circle where that caliper piston will make contact. That seems to keep it a little bit quieter. Make sure you don't get any grease at all on the braking surface. If you do, just wipe it off. Same thing with the outboard pad. Now this does have a shim built in, and there's not another shim on here, so we're just going to do it just like this. Mostly really need it right here where it makes contact, like right here on the caliper. You can use put a little bit of grease on there too, and then just a little bit at the ends. This envelope really doesn't have much grease in it at all, so you're going to want to be using that somewhat sparingly. Just keep that in mind. And we'll put a little bit on the surface of that caliper there too. And then just pop the new pad in there. Careful not to get grease on the surface or on the rotor. Before I put the caliper back on, here's what I wanted to show you. This little part right here, this is the old little pad retainer clip. These little parts that stick down there, a lot of times they just don't seat all the way down. So sometimes I'll just grab something like this, like a screwdriver, and just kind of wedge it in between the rotor, almost bending it upwards. Just make sure that those are seated. It's also a good idea maybe to turn the rotor, make sure it's not scratching on that. Car's in gear, so I can't spin it freely, but you get the idea. All right, and then we can put these little V springs back in. You're going to want to keep one hand with some pressure pulling the pads towards each other. If you don't, they'll pop out and you have to start over. And then we can just bring the caliper back down over the pads. Sometimes you need to pull on these little slide pins to get it to line up, but that works out okay. And then we can put these bolts back in. These are really going in easy, so we'll just thread those in by hand. And we want to torque these to 23 foot-pounds. As you're tightening that, if these slide pins will spin, you can always just put a 17mm open-end wrench on there. And you're done. Now before you head out, just remember to step on the brake pedal a few times until it's firm. You don't need to press it all the way to the floor, but what you're doing is pushing the caliper piston back out, pressing those brake pads up against the rotor where they need to be. Also top off the brake fluid in your master cylinder. And of course, just make sure everything is torqued to spec. Double check your manual on the torque specs there. That's 72 for the main caliper support bracket bolt, and then 23 for the slide pin bolt. That's just what I was able to find online. Hope you liked the video. Please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you don't mind. That does help me out. I'll put a link in the description where you can pick up these pads and rotors along with some of the parts and tools used in the video. Now I'm also going to be doing the rear brakes on this vehicle, so I'll make sure to get a link to that video in the description as well. Thanks so much for watching, and good luck.